The battle cruiser Concordant Spear hung in the void, its iridescent hull reflecting the distant starlight like a predator lurking in deep waters. Commander Kalen stood at the viewport, four-fingered hands clasped tightly behind his back, yellow eyes fixed on the tactical display where dozens of red markers represented the four-lag battle fleet. "They have not advanced in 36 hours, Lieutenant Mara reported, her exoskeleton clicking softly as she approached. "Our long-range sensors detect increased communication between their vessels, but we cannot penetrate their encryption." Kalen's scaled skin rippled in a pattern that, among Xylosians, indicated deep thought. "The Vorlag do not hesitate." They do not negotiate. They advance, conquer, or die trying. This behavior is anomalous. His words hung in the air like the unspoken question all aboard the Concordant Spear were asking. What were the Vorlag waiting for? The answer came minutes later when Communications Officer Jaren's voice broke the tense silence. "Commander, we're receiving a message from Concord Command. Priority Alpha." Kalen strode to the command chair and activated the secure channel. The holographic image of Admiral Terevic materialized, the old Andari's tendrils twitching with what Kalen recognized as apprehension. "Commander Kalen, a diplomatic vessel has been dispatched to your position. You are to provide full protection and cooperation." Kalen's inner eyelids flickered in surprise. "Admiral, we are facing the entire Third Four-Lag Fleet. This is an active combat zone. Diplomatic vessels have no place here." "These orders come directly from the High Council," Terevic replied, his tone leaving no room for debate. "The vessel carries Ambassador Ilaravanya and a human observer." The bridge fell silent. Kalen's skin flushed a deep blue, the Xylosian equivalent of disbelief. A human? In a first-contact negotiation with the Four-Lag? The absurdity of it struck Kalen like a physical blow. Humans were the newest species in the Galactic Concord, barely a century into space travel, their technology centuries behind most member species. They were considered amusing curiosities at best, primitive savages at worst. What possible contribution could a human make to these proceedings? Admiral Terevic's tendrils flattened against his skull, a sign of displeasure. "The decision is not yours to question, Commander. The human's name is Dr. Eris Thorne, an anthropologist specializing in first-contact protocols. His presence is politically necessary." Kalen understood the unspoken message. The humans were pushing for greater representation in Concord affairs, and some high-ranking official had decided to placate them with this meaningless gesture, allowing a human to observe a diplomatic mission that, given the Four-Lag's history of brutality, would almost certainly end in failure. "The diplomatic vessel will arrive within 6 hours, Terevic continued. "You will brief Ambassador Vanya on the current situation and provide whatever assistance she requires." "Yes, Admiral," Kalen replied, his skin returning to its normal gray hue as he regained his composure. "We will ensure the safety of the diplomatic mission to the best of our ability." After the transmission ended, Lieutenant Mara approached cautiously. "Commander, should we adjust our defensive posture?" "Maintain battle readiness," Kalen ordered, "and prepare guest quarters for the ambassador and the observer." He couldn't keep the contempt from his voice as he spoke the last word. A human observer was the last thing this precarious situation needed. 5 hours and 23 minutes later, the sleek diplomatic vessel Evening Star slipped into the Concordant Spear's docking bay. Kalen was waiting in the reception area, flanked by his senior officers and a ceremonial honor guard, a courtesy afforded to any ambassador, regardless of how ill-advised their mission might be. Ambassador Ilaravanya emerged first, her tall, willowy Lorian frame draped in the traditional silver-blue robes of her office. Her iridescent skin glowed faintly in the ship's lighting, and her 4 eyes, characteristic of Lorians, assessed the reception party with practiced diplomacy. "Commander Kalen," she greeted him with a formal bow. "The Concord appreciates your service in these trying times." "Ambassador," Kalen returned the bow, precisely calibrated to the depth appropriate for her rank. "The Concordant Spear is at your disposal." His attention shifted to the figure that emerged behind the ambassador. The human was smaller than Kalen had expected, with dark skin and close-cropped gray hair. He wore simple dark clothing rather than the ostentatious uniforms humans usually preferred. Most surprising were his eyes, dark and watchful, missing nothing, yet revealing nothing in return. "May I present Dr. Eris Thorn," Ambassador Vanya said, her tone carefully neutral. Dr. Thorn is serving as the human representative and observer for these proceedings. The human stepped forward and offered a slight bow. "Commander, I'm grateful for your hospitality. I assure you I'm here only to observe and learn. I'll endeavor to stay out of your way." His voice was soft yet precise, his demeanor calm and scholarly. Kalen had expected bluster and ignorance, the traits most commonly associated with humans in Concord space, but found himself facing something entirely different, something he couldn't immediately categorize. "Dr. Thorn," Kalen acknowledged with the slightest of nods, the bare minimum courtesy required by protocol. "My executive officer will show you to your quarters. I must brief the ambassador immediately on our tactical situation." "Of course," Thorn replied, producing a small device that Kalen recognized as a primitive data tablet. "With your permission, I'll begin my observations of your ship's operations. The interaction between different species in high-stress environments is my particular area of study." Before Kalen could formulate a suitably dismissive response, Communications Officer Jaren's voice came over the intercom. "Commander, priority message from the Forlag fleet." The timing was too perfect to be coincidence. Somehow, the Forlag had detected the arrival of the diplomatic vessel, despite the Concordant Spear's stealth systems. "Put it through to the Strategic Command Center," Kalen ordered, gesturing for Ambassador Vanya to follow him. After a moment's hesitation, he reluctantly added, "Dr. Thorn, as observer, you may attend as well." The command center was a spherical chamber at the heart of the ship, its walls displaying a 360-degree view of surrounding space. The Forlag fleet hung in the distance like a constellation of malevolence. The message was audio only, typical of the Forlag, who considered visual communication a sign of weakness. "Concord vessel." The voice was deep and resonant, processed through translation algorithms, but still carrying the metallic quality of Forlag speech. "I am Marshal Kresh of the Forlag Third Fleet. We have detected your diplomatic vessel. We are interested in negotiation." Kalen and Ambassador Vanya exchanged looks of shock. In the 3 decades since their emergence from the Cygnus Reach, the Forlag had never once expressed interest in diplomacy. They conquered, subjugated, or exterminated. Their technological superiority and ruthless efficiency had pushed the Concord into a defensive posture across 12 star systems. "Marshal Kresh," Ambassador Vanya responded, her voice betraying none of her surprise. "This is Ambassador Ilera Vanya of the Galactic Concord. We welcome your interest in peaceful dialogue." "Not peace," the Forlag voice corrected. "Negotiation. There's a difference. We will permit your diplomatic vessel to approach our command ship. Bring your delegation. Small. 3 individuals only." The transmission ended abruptly. "It's a trap," Lieutenant Maris stated flatly. "Perhaps," Kalen agreed. "But why bother with deception? Their fleet outguns us 3-1. If they wanted to destroy us, they would have done so already." Ambassador Vanya was already calculating diplomatic strategies. "This is unprecedented. If there's even a chance for dialogue with the Forlag, we must seize it. I'll accompany you with a security detail," Kalen began. "No," Vanya interrupted. "We must honor their terms exactly. Myself, my security officer, and—" She glanced at Dr. Thorn, who had been silently taking notes on his device. "The human observer." "That is out of the question," Kalen said flatly. "The human has no diplomatic training, no combat experience, and no value to these negotiations." "On the contrary," Vanya replied, "Dr. Thorn's presence was specifically requested by the High Council. This could be our only opportunity to establish diplomatic contact with the Forlag. We will proceed as I have outlined." Kalen knew when he was outranked. "At least allow us to equip you with emergency transponders and concealed weapons. The ambassador nodded her assent. We depart in 1 hour. As preparations began, Kalen noticed Dr. Thorne standing slightly apart, still making notes. The human's calm demeanor in the face of such danger was either remarkable courage or remarkable ignorance. Kalen couldn't decide which. Dr. Thorne, he said, approaching the human. You understand that this mission carries extreme risk. The Forlag are known for their brutality, not their hospitality. Thorne looked up from his device, those dark, unreadable eyes meeting Kalen's. I understand the risks, Commander, but I've observed that first impressions between species often set patterns that persist for generations. This moment may be more important than any of us realize. There is something in the human's tone, a quiet certainty that Kalen found both presumptuous and oddly compelling. He dismissed the thought and returned to preparing the mission. The human was just a political token, nothing more. Whatever happened next would be determined by Ambassador Vanya's diplomatic skills and, more likely, the inscrutable intentions of the Forlag. 1 hour later, the diplomatic shuttle departed from the Concordant Spears Bay, carrying Ambassador Vanya, her Dravian security officer Talek, and Dr. Eris Thorne toward the massive Forlag command ship. From the bridge, Kalen watched the tiny vessel approach the looming dark structure, a construct that resembled a series of obsidian blades arranged in a spiraling formation. Maintain weapon locks on all Forlag vessels, Kalen ordered. At the first sign of hostility, we extract our people or avenge them. The diplomatic shuttle disappeared into a yawning bay in the Forlag vessel. Long minutes of tense silence followed. We're receiving a transmission from the ambassador's communicator, Jaren reported. Audio and visual. Put it through, Kalen ordered. The main screen flickered to life, showing a vast chamber of dark metal. Ambassador Vanya and her security officer stood rigidly, facing what could only be Marshal Kresh of the Forlag. Kalen had seen images of the Forlag before, but the reality was far more imposing. Marshal Kresh was a pyramidal structure of what appeared to be living metal, standing nearly 3 meters tall. Multiple appendages extended from various points on its surface, some delicate and precise, others clearly weapons. At the apex of the pyramid, a cluster of crystalline sensors glowed with an inner red light. Ambassador Vanya of the Concord. The Forlag's voice resonated through the chamber. You stand before the might of the Forlag Dominion. State your purpose. Ambassador Vanya, to her credit, showed no fear. Marshal Kresh, I come with the authority to discuss terms for the cessation of hostilities and the establishment of boundaries between our territories. Boundaries, the Forlag repeated, the word somehow sounding like a foreign concept. The Forlag recognize no boundaries except those that exist temporarily before conquest. The ambassador began to outline a proposal for a demilitarized zone, but Kalen noticed something strange. The Forlag was not focusing its sensor cluster on Vanya. Instead, its attention seemed fixed on Dr. Thorne, who stood slightly behind the ambassador, quietly observing the proceedings. After several minutes of Vanya's diplomatic overtures, Marshal Kresh suddenly interrupted. Who is the smaller being that accompanies you? Ambassador Vanya hesitated, clearly thrown by the question. This is Dr. Eris Thorne, a human observer from Earth, a member world of the Concord. Human, the Forlag repeated, its appendages shifting in what might have been curiosity. We have data on your species. Primitive, technologically inferior. Yet you are here. The Marshal moved closer to Thorne, its massive form looming over the human. Why does a species with no significant military or technological contribution warrant representation in this discussion? Before Ambassador Vanya could intervene, Thorne spoke directly to the Forlag. I am here to observe and learn, Marshal Kresh. Humans are newcomers to the galactic community. We have much to understand about species like yours. Species like mine, Kresh echoed. And what do you perceive about the Forlag, human? I perceive a civilization of great accomplishment, Thorne replied calmly. Your technological advancement speaks to remarkable intelligence and purpose. But I also perceive a question at the heart of your conquests, a question all sentient beings face, regardless of their power. Kresh's sensor cluster brightened. What question? The question of meaning, Thorn said simply. Why conquer? What is the purpose beyond dominance itself? What legacy remains when all opposition has been eliminated? On the Concordant Spears Bridge, Kalen watched in disbelief. The human was philosophizing with the most feared military commander in the quadrant, as though they were academics at a symposium. These questions are irrelevant, Kresh stated. Conquest is the nature of the strong. It requires no justification. Perhaps, Thorn acknowledged. But humans have found that meaning often lies beyond the realm of power and domination. May I share some aspects of human culture with you? They might illuminate why we value things beyond conquest. This is not the purpose of these negotiations, Ambassador Vanya interjected, clearly trying to regain control of the situation. But Marshal Kresh raised an appendage, silencing her. I will hear what the human has to say. Ambassador Vanya, you and your security officer will return to the anteroom. The human will remain. That is unacceptable, Vanya protested. Dr. Thorn is under my authority and protection. Then these negotiations are concluded, Kresh stated. Flatly, after a tense moment, Vanya reluctantly complied, casting a concerned look at Thorn as she and Talek were escorted from the chamber. On the Concordant Spear, Kalen watched with growing alarm. What is that human doing? He demanded of no one in particular. This isn't a cultural exchange program. Yet, to everyone's surprise, what followed was exactly that. Dr. Thorn began sharing elements of human history, art, music, and philosophy with the four-lag marshal. He spoke of Earth's ancient civilizations, of human conflicts and reconciliations, of art created in the face of destruction, and music composed during humanity's darkest hours. At one point, Thorn produced his tablet and displayed images of human artistic masterpieces from various periods. He played short segments of music, everything from classical symphonies to indigenous tribal rhythms. He recited poetry and described human religious and philosophical concepts. Most surprisingly, Marshal Kresh listened. The four-lag asked questions, not about military strength or territorial boundaries, but about human creative processes, about how humans found meaning in ephemeral experiences, about the human concept of legacy beyond material conquest. You create these things that have no practical function, Kresh observed after Thorn showed him images of the Sistine Chapel. They do not increase your survival probability or your combat effectiveness. And yet, they have helped us survive as a species, Thorn replied. When humans face existential threats or profound loss, it is often these impractical creations that sustain our will to continue. They connect us to something beyond our individual existence. After nearly 2 hours of this bizarre cultural exchange, Marshal Kresh abruptly ended the session and ordered Thorn to rejoin the ambassador. The Concord delegation was then returned to their shuttle and permitted to depart. When they arrived back at the Concordant Spear, Kalen was waiting in the docking bay, his normally composed demeanor showing clear signs of agitation. What happened over there? He demanded as soon as the delegation emerged from the shuttle. Ambassador Vanya, you were removed from the negotiations. And you, Dr. Thorn, what exactly did you discuss with Marshal Kresh? Ambassador Vanya looked equally confused and somewhat affronted. Commander, I was as surprised as you. The Four-Lag showed no interest in territorial discussions or ceasefire terms. They seemed fixated on Dr. Thorn and human culture. All eyes turned to Thorn, who was making notes on his tablet with the same calm demeanor he had maintained throughout. Dr. Thorn, Kalen pressed, explain yourself. Thorn looked up, his expression thoughtful. Marshal Kresh was curious about humanity, not our technology or military capabilities, but our art, philosophy, and how we derive meaning from existence. I simply answered his questions. For what purpose? Kalen demanded. Understanding, Thorn replied. Isn't that the foundation of all diplomacy? Kalen's patience was wearing thin. This is not an academic exercise, Dr. Thorn. We are facing an enemy that has destroyed entire civilizations without remorse. What could you possibly hope to achieve by discussing human art with them? A connection, Thorne said simply. Every sentient species seeks meaning, Commander Kalen. Evens a Forlag. The Forlag seek conquest, not meaning, Kalen retorted. And yet, Thorne countered gently. Marshal Kresh has requested another meeting. Tomorrow. With me alone. Absolutely not, Ambassador Vanya interjected. I cannot authorize a private meeting between a civilian observer and the commander of an enemy fleet. With respect, Ambassador, Thorne replied. Marshal Kresh made it clear that he will speak only with me. If we decline, this brief opening for dialogue will close. Kalen and Vanya exchanged troubled glances. The situation defied all protocol and common sense. Yet, somehow this unremarkable human had achieved what seasoned Concord diplomats had failed to do for decades. He had engaged the Forlag in conversation. I need to consult with Concord Command, Vanya said finally. Until then, Dr. Thorne, you will brief us fully on everything you discussed with Marshal Kresh. In the Strategic Command Center, Thorne recounted his conversation with the Forlag Marshal. His recall was impressive, providing details of questions asked and answers given. Yet Kalen sensed the human was being selective in his reporting, emphasizing some aspects while minimizing others. There must be some ulterior motive, Lieutenant Mara insisted when Thorne had finished. The Forlag do not engage in cultural exchange. They study enemies only to identify weaknesses before attack. I agree, Kalen said. Dr. Thorne, did Marshal Kresh ask about Earth's defenses, population centers, or governmental structures? No, Thorne replied. His questions focused almost exclusively on human creative expression, philosophical perspectives on mortality, and how we find purpose in existence. That makes no tactical sense, Kalen muttered. Not everything is about tactics, Commander, Thorne observed quietly. While Ambassador Vanya consulted with Concord Command, Kalen ordered his intelligence officer to conduct a more thorough background check on Dr. Eris Thorne. The initial dossier had been cursory, an anthropologist specializing in interspecies cultural exchange, with no military background or security clearances of note. But Kalen's instincts told him there was more to this human than met the eye. Hours later, Intelligence Officer Vec delivered her findings privately to Kalen's quarters. Dr. Thorne's credentials as an anthropologist are genuine, she reported. However, there are some interesting gaps in his background. Before his academic career, he spent 5 years in a research division of Earth's unified government that has since been classified. He also has published several papers on strategic psychology and game theory as applied to interspecies conflict. So he's not just a cultural observer, Kalen said, pieces beginning to fall into place. No, sir. And there's something else. Vec handed him a data crystal. I've analyzed the cultural materials Dr. Thorne shared with Marshal Kresh. On the surface, they appear to be standard examples of human artistic achievement. But there's a pattern to his selections that suggests deliberate psychological framing. Explain, Kalen prompted. The art, music, and stories he chose all center around common themes. Survival against overwhelming odds, finding strength in apparent weakness, the triumph of will over material constraints, and the idea that true legacy lies in ideas rather than conquest. Kalen's inner eyelids flickered as he processed this information. You're suggesting Dr. Thorne was engaging in psychological warfare? Not exactly, sir, Vec replied. It's more subtle than that. The materials aren't propaganda in the conventional sense. They're cultural artifacts that, when presented in this particular sequence to a species like the Forlag, might induce a very specific type of philosophical crisis. Meanwhile, aboard the Forlag command ship, Marshal Kresh was experiencing exactly such a crisis. The pyramidal being floated in its regeneration chamber, appendages withdrawn, sensor cluster dimmed to minimal activity. Yet its processing matrix was in a state of unprecedented activity, analyzing and reanalyzing the information provided by the human. For 3,000 cycles, the Forlag had expanded across space according to the fundamental principle. Strength conquers, weakness perishes. It was not merely a military doctrine, but the central tenet of four-lag existence. Their technological supremacy was the natural justification for their right to dominate. Yet the human had presented something that did not fit this paradigm. The humans, by all objective measures, were weak. Their technology was primitive, their physical forms fragile, their lifespan brief. By four-lag logic, they should have been dismissed as inconsequential. But the human named Thorn had shared creations that persisted beyond individual lifespans. Ideas that survived the destruction of entire civilizations. Beauty that emerged from suffering. Strength that manifested not despite weakness, but because of it. Most disturbing was the concept of meaning derived from intangible, immeasurable sources. The four-lag measured value in objective terms. Territory controlled, resources acquired, technological advancement achieved. The human measured value in experiences that left no physical trace, yet somehow connected individual consciousness to a larger, enduring reality. Kresh had asked, when your physical form ceases, what remains? The human had responded, the impact we've had on others, the ideas we've shared, the beauty we've created or appreciated, the love we've given and received. These are not quantifiable, Kresh had observed. No, the human agreed. And yet they are what we live for. This concept was alien, and yet Kresh could not dismiss it. For the first time in its existence, the four-lag marshal found itself contemplating a form of power that could not be measured by conventional metrics, a power that might, in some incomprehensible way, transcend the very physical dominance upon which four-lag civilization was founded. It was this unsettling thought process that led Kresh to request a second meeting with the human. Back on the Concordant Spear, Concord Command had reluctantly authorized Dr. Thorne's second meeting with Marshal Kresh, with strict safety protocols in place. Thorne would wear enhanced monitoring devices, and the Concordant Spear would maintain constant transporter lock on his position. Before Thorne departed, Kalen confronted him in private. I know what you're doing, Dr. Thorne, he said without preamble. You're not just an anthropologist sharing cultural curiosities. Thorne regarded the Xylosian commander with those same calm, unreadable eyes. What am I doing, Commander Kalen? You're conducting psychological operations against the four-lag, Kalen stated, using human cultural concepts as weapons. A slight smile crossed Thorne's face. Is sharing one's culture an act of aggression, Commander? It is when it's carefully curated to destabilize the enemy's foundational beliefs, Kalen countered. The question is why? What is your true objective here? Thorne was silent for a moment, his expression growing more serious. The four-lag understand only domination through superior force. They cannot be defeated through conventional means because their technology will always advance faster than ours. So they must be approached differently. By confusing them with human art and philosophy? Kalen's skin rippled with skepticism. By introducing them to a form of power they have never considered, Thorne corrected. The power of meaning beyond conquest. The power of legacy beyond physical dominance. To what end? That depends on them, Thorne said simply. I'm merely opening a door. Whether they step through it is their choice. When Dr. Thorne arrived for his second meeting with Marshal Kresh, he found the four-lag command chamber transformed. The harsh lighting had been dimmed, and holographic displays around the room showed rotating images of the artwork Thorne had shared previously. You have returned, Kresh stated, its sensor cluster brightening as Thorne entered. I have, Thorne acknowledged. I'm grateful for the opportunity to continue our discussion. I have reviewed the materials you shared, Kresh said. I have many questions. I'm here to answer them, Thorne replied. What followed was not recorded in full. Whether due to four-lag interference or deliberate action by Thorne himself, the monitoring devices aboard the Concordant Spear received only fragments of the conversation. What came through were disjointed discussions about human ethical systems, the concept of beauty arising from impermanence, and the human willingness to sacrifice individual existence for abstract principles. At one point, Thorne was heard saying, The paradox of human existence is that we find meaning precisely because we are temporary. Our art, our stories, our connections, they are valuable because they do not last forever. Kresh's response was partly lost to interference, but included, contradicts all logic. Value increases with permanence and power. Does it? Thorne's voice came through clearly. Or does that assumption itself limit what you might become? Later, Thorne was heard telling a story, what appeared to be an ancient Earth fable about a powerful empire that conquered all known lands, only to discover that its greatest achievements were not its conquests, but the wisdom and art that outlasted its fall. Your species creates fiction, intentional falsehoods, as a method of conveying truth, Kresh observed, sounding perplexed. This practice seems contradictory. The greatest truths often lie beyond literal description, Thorne replied. Sometimes, only through metaphor and symbol can we grasp what logic alone cannot reach. The conversation continued for nearly 4 hours before Thorne returned to the concordant spear. He appeared tired but strangely energized, his normally composed demeanor showing hints of what might have been satisfaction. What happened? Kalen demanded as soon as Thorne emerged from the shuttle. Our monitoring was compromised. We talked. Thorne said simply. Marshal Kresh is processing. Processing what? Ambassador Vanya asked. New possibilities, Thorne replied. Over the next 48 hours, strange reports began filtering in from the Forlag fleet. The rigid communication protocols that had characterized Forlag operations for decades were showing signs of disruption. Lower-ranking Forlag commanders were requesting clarification of orders. Sensor sweeps became erratic. Several Forlag vessels changed position without apparent tactical purpose. Something's happening over there, Lieutenant Mara reported. Their fleet operations have lost cohesion. Prepare for possible attack, Kalen ordered. This could be prelude to an offensive. But no attack came. Instead, after another 12 hours of increasingly erratic behavior, the Forlag command ship transmitted a message directly to the concordant spear. Marshal Kresh requests the presence of the human Thorne, the message stated. Immediately, this third meeting was approved with great reluctance by both Commander Kalen and Ambassador Vanya. Something unprecedented was occurring within the Forlag fleet, and none of the Concord's tactical models could predict what might happen next. Before Thorne departed, Kalen pulled him aside once. More. What did you do to them, Dr. Thorne? He asked, his tone somewhere between accusation and awe. Thorne regarded him steadily. I show them a mirror, Commander. Sometimes, seeing oneself through alien eyes reveals truths that were always present but never perceived. And if they react with violence? Kalen pressed. Then we will have learned something important about them, Thorne replied. But I don't believe they will. As Thorne's shuttle approached the Forlag command ship for the third time, Kalen ordered the concordant spear to battle readiness. If this was an elaborate trap, they would be prepared to extract their human diplomat, for that was what Thorne had become, regardless of his official designation. But when Thorne entered Marshal Kresh's chamber, he found the Forlag leader alone, its appendages withdrawn, its massive form seeming somehow diminished. You have damaged us, Kresh stated without preamble. That was not my intention, Thorne replied. Intention is irrelevant. Effect is what matters. Kresh's voice had lost some of its resonance. The concepts you have introduced are spreading through our command structure like a virus. Subordinates are questioning directives. Processing matrices are allocating resources to philosophical inquiries. Efficiency has decreased by 17%. I share perspectives, Marshal Kresh. Nothing more. You have shown us a form of power we cannot quantify, Kresh said. A form we cannot defend against through conventional means. This is warfare of a kind we have not encountered. Not warfare, Thorne corrected gently. Evolution. The distinction is semantic, Kresh replied. The outcome is the same. We cannot continue our expansion while this infection of thought persists. What will you do? Thorne asked. The only logical course. We will withdraw from Concord space. We must isolate and process these new concepts. We must adapt or risk systemic failure. Thorne was silent for a moment, his expression unreadable. And when you have processed these ideas, what then? Unknown, Kresh admitted. We are entering uncharted territory. But conflict with the Concord is suspended indefinitely. We have more important matters to consider. When Thorne returned to the Concordant Spear with news of the Forlag's decision, the reaction was stunned disbelief. Ambassador Vanya insisted on confirmation, which came an hour later in a formal communication from Marshal Kresh to Concord Command. The Forlag Dominion is withdrawing all forces from disputed territories, the message stated. A state of non-aggression will be maintained while we undertake internal reassessment of strategic priorities and existential paradigms. Further communication will follow when this process is complete. Within 24 hours, the Forlag fleet began to move, not toward Concord space as everyone had feared, but away from it. Vessel by vessel, the most feared armada in the quadrant disengaged and departed. On the bridge of the Concordant Spear, Kalen watched the tactical display in silence as the red markers representing Forlag ships diminished and finally disappeared. They're actually leaving, Lieutenant Maris said, unable to keep the wonder from her voice. Without firing a single shot, Ambassador Vanya turned to Dr. Thorne, who stood quietly at the back of the bridge, making final notes on his tablet. "What did you say to them?" she asked. "What did you offer them that made the Forlag, retreat?" "I didn't offer them anything," Thorne replied. "I simply introduced them to aspects of humanity they had never considered. The rest was their choice." As the Concordant Spear prepared to return to Concord space with news of this unprecedented diplomatic victory, Kalen found himself studying Dr. Thorne with new eyes. The human was preparing to board a transport back to Earth, his observer mission complete. "Dr. Thorne," Kalen said, approaching him in the docking bay. "Before you leave, I must know, was this your intention all along? Did you come here specifically to psychologically disarm the Forlag?" Thorne smiled slightly. "I came as an observer, Commander Kalen. That's all. An observer who just happened to possess exactly the right psychological tools to destabilize the enemy's entire belief system." Kalen's skin rippled with skepticism. "Human culture contains multitudes, Commander," Thorne replied. "I simply shared what seemed relevant to the situation." As Thorne turned to board his transport, Kalen felt a chill run through his body, a primitive response his species experienced rarely, usually in moments of existential realization. "Dr. Thorne," he called out, "one last question. The Forlag were affected because they had never encountered human ideas before. But what about the rest of us? The other Concord species who believe we understand humans?" Thorne paused at the transport entrance and turned back. For just a moment, Kalen thought he saw something in those dark eyes, something ancient and knowing that belied the human's unassuming appearance. "Perhaps you understand humans better than you think, Commander," Thorne said. "Or perhaps you've only seen what we've chosen to show you." With that, he stepped aboard the transport and was gone. In the days that followed, as the Concord celebrated the bloodless resolution of the Forlag threat, Kalen found himself reviewing everything he knew about humanity. They had been dismissed as technologically primitive, politically chaotic, and militarily insignificant. Yet a single human, armed with nothing but stories and ideas, had accomplished what fleets of warships could not. The official report described Dr. Eris Thorne as a diplomatic observer whose cultural insights proved unexpectedly valuable in negotiations. But Kalen knew the truth was far more unsettling. The human hadn't been an observer at all. He had been a weapon, or perhaps more accurately, a virus, introduced precisely to infect and transform the enemy from within. And if humans could do this to the Forlag, what might they someday do to their allies? As the Concordant Spear journeyed home, Kalen stood at the viewport, watching the stars streak by. He thought of Dr. Thorne's parting words and felt that same primitive chill again. The most dangerous power in the universe, he realized, wasn't superior technology or military might. It was the power to plant ideas that could transform consciousness itself. The Forelag had recognized this too late. The question that kept Kalen awake in the cycles that followed was whether the rest of the Concord would recognize it in time. For the being that was supposed to be merely a diplomatic observer had revealed a truth that could not be unlearned. In the theater of galactic power, the most profound revolutions began not with weapons, but with words. And humans, it seemed, were masters of both.